Okay, let's talk about KPIs.
What KPIs are you tracking for your business?
Oh, I love KPIs. I really do. I really do. Why don't we zoom back for a second? And why KPIs? Why are we having this discussion? Why are KPIs important? Why are they important?
You can't improve what you can't measure.
Bingo. Because how would you know that you're improving it?
Exactly.
You can't even know if you should improve it if you can't measure it, technically.
True. And do you feel you can measure everything for a business?
Most. Some are tougher than others. I think that some are more effective than others, but you can make progress towards all. Now, they might not be 100% effective, but I think you should at least try.
Okay.
So I think you can't improve what you can't measure is one. The other one is it dictates people's behavior. It dictates people's collaboration. It dictates the entire, from my perspective, business model in general. Like your entire go-to-market strategy is dependent upon what KPIs you're incentivizing and pushing people to achieve. I think that people err too much on the side. Every time that I hear people talk about, what's more important, people, process, what's the other one? There's people, process, and something else. I'm like, process. Process is always the most important. Because I think generally speaking, you're going to hire roughly about the same type of people, in the market that everyone else is. Now you can be a little bit better, you can be a little bit worse, but I think process is going to dictate everyone's behavior is going to be, Jordan Peterson talks about this a lot, everyone's behavior is going to be dependent upon what their goal is, because it's to achieve the goal. He actually says that there can be no, unless you have a negative reattribution of I go out and party and then I feel bad the next day, to have a positive win without negative reattribution, it has to have a goal.
So I have a different view on that topic.
Okay.
So I want to challenge you on this because I think it's really interesting what you mentioned, and I agree with that part saying that people will always optimize their results towards their goals.
Yes.
However, whenever you look at how different departments in a company works, I feel like the KPIs that we are measuring are going against,
of course they are.
So if you take marketing and sales, the classic one, MQLs, marketing qualified leads versus SQLs, sales qualified leads, are often very different. So whenever you're going to put pressure on marketing to increase the amount of marketing qualified leads, the quality is going to decrease. So the sales are going to say that the leads are not good enough for them. Sometimes it's sales fault because they are not doing enough research on the leads. They are not reaching out to the lead. They're not trying to book demos.
Sometimes.
And sometimes it's from the marketing side. However, they both have KPIs that have been set, but
mutually exclusive from one another. It's bizarre. I'm so glad you call it out because to me, everyone wants to talk about qualitatively how to get better, and I'm like, first things before you do anything, your KPIs have to be correct. And I haven't seen a program yet that I'm like, oh, they got it 85% right. Usually, to your point, even if we said okay, we're going to do it on MQL, usually the definition that I see of MQL is anyone who downloaded your content. And so even the definitions have to be tight. If you walked up to anyone in marketing, I remember having this conversation over and over with marketing, and I'm like, walk me through how this is a lead. This is an intern over at Oracle, and you're associating $12 billion worth of pipeline because they're from Oracle. Walk me through how this is a lead. And they're like, well, it's a definition. I'm like, but walk me through how it's a lead. And they're like, it's a definition. I'm like, I'm going to say it one more time. Because I feel like Brendan. And I'm like, walk me through. I said, let me take a step back. This is an intern. Do we sell to interns? And they're like, no. And I'm like, cool. So let's say for a second that I was successful with sales development and booking a meeting with this person. Do you think the AE would accept it? They're like, probably not. Then I'm like, then walk me through how it's a lead. A lead should be, you're leading me towards a situation that we want to go towards as a company. So I think it's not only the KPIs that you have to redefine, but it's the definitions of these KPIs that you have to redefine to even have a prayer of it being a funnel again. This is the main issue to me.
And what do you feel about to help people improve performance, focus on the output rather than the outcome? What's your feeling about it? Because all KPIs are obviously the amount of revenue you're going to close on a quarter is not something that's entirely on your control.
Totally.
Because you never know, like, if there's a recession, you never know if there's COVID hitting, you never know, like, what's up with their budget, if the decision maker change. Like, there can be hundreds of different reasons why a deal will not close or why several deals will not close. So what do you feel about, instead of actually like tracking the outcome, we track the output of everyone, so we know that they are basically improving on what they can deliver rather than improving on the outcome that they don't actually control.
I think that you bring up an extremely important topic, and one that I never hear brought up, of what can they control, and focusing on that per department. I don't subscribe to the thought of like, you know, you can measure everyone on the same goal, just because I've seen too many of like, if it's a group goal, then it doesn't, like, the spotlight's not on me too much.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a department output, to your point, but it needs to be defined in a way that they could control it. And I'll give you an example. Sales development is typically measured on booked meetings.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, you know, they'll call into someone if they're successful in booking the meeting, then they pass it over to the AE, and they have to qualify on buyer intent, or is this the quote unquote decision maker? And the reality is they couldn't call that shot beforehand. Now you can control, are you calling a director versus a manager versus a VP versus an individual contributor?
Yeah.
So I'm like, and they're closely linked, but you can't find out if they have a buyer initiative from the overt perspective. So I always KPI'd my reps on like, what are the overt indicators that they could control beforehand? If they were successful in booking that meeting and it was a director or whatever you want to set it at, regardless of whether they're the ultimate quote unquote decision maker, I would give credit to the SDR for booking the meeting. So it's like, you can't rattle some BANT questions at someone just because it makes you feel better to see if they're qualified. And I think that there's one for each one of those steps in the funnel, for marketing, for sales development, and for sales, that it's like, okay, from the overt perspective, what could I control in this process so that you ultimately, you know, now if you understand, you take a step back and look at the data and you're like, okay, directors aren't converting for us. It's like, cool, well then change your KPI from director to manager and say like, it's only a win if it's a manager, or only a win if it's a VP, for example, but they still can see that title on LinkedIn beforehand.
Yeah.
You know, or employee size, we would have LinkedIn as our point of truth. You know, so that we're like, okay, what happens if you came in and 200 reps randomly churned? Then the SDR wouldn't get dinged for that because they couldn't have known that before they in the hunting process. I'm gonna be quiet. What do you think?
No, I think it's interesting. It's just like from a personal experience perspective, I've tried these things where, you know, like each department had, you know, like their own KPIs, and what I figured out is that it was messing up the entire like team spirit.
Really?
So we switched to having
group goals.
So it was only like people would get a bonus no matter the department they're part of. So devs would get devs are getting a bonus, support is getting a bonus, sales is getting a bonus. They're all getting a bonus based on the revenue target that we're hitting. But to your point, we are seeing that people get less engaged, or at least you see like less accountability within the team, because there is no real ownership.
Yeah.
Sometimes marketing.
Whose fault is it if it doesn't work?
If the growth slowdown, whose fault it is? Is it sales? Is it marketing? And if you don't measure all these things, it's very difficult. So for me, it's like, it's still a challenge right now to know how exactly to set up like different KPIs. So what we've done, and that's why I was wondering like your point of view on the
I've got an idea for you. Keep going. I got an idea for you. So, it's going to sound crazy.
So for us, we don't use like KPIs. We use like OKRs, which are, it's a bit different, but similar.
Right.
And what I like about OKRs is you can have like objective, like growing your revenue, which is like global company objective. And then you can have like the key results, meaning what you want to reach. But in the key results, because you just need to put things that you can measure, what I love to put in each individual OKR is actually key results that are based on your output. So for example, it could be like post 100 times on social media about specific topic, post X things in this community, find 20 guests for this specific event. All these type of things, I think, put more ownership to people on a specific project that will later on lead to the company's goal. But you really need to spend a lot of time in planning.
Analyzing that. So I have an idea for you, and it's going to sound out of the box, but you know, so are most well, at least my ideas. What I've done in the past is basically, you still measure people on their specific KPI, but to your point, what that can cause is, like, on one hand, you don't want to put everyone on a revenue target because then there's no ownership. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, you don't want to give them a specific KPI that's independent of the team, because then you just get a ton of dials or a ton of whatever it is, but you don't get the end goal. So what I've done in the past is I've KPI'd them essentially on both, not a split, but essentially, if you hit the revenue target as a company, it unlocks the ability to be KPI'd on your SQL or your MQL or blah, 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 but no one gets that upside bonus unless they hit it.
Nice.
But once they hit the upside bonus, then it's like, let's say that, you booked 10 meetings or something and I booked 5 meetings, and so, person C booked 20 meetings. It's like, if you only do revenue, then we're not, like, the 20 person would be like, hey, it's not fair because she only booked 5. But if we all, that causes us to all group think and say, like, okay, we have to hit this revenue target, but once we do, we still get paid out accordingly to the output. So I usually think, and I think most people in the industry, they don't even have this conversation, because I would guess 2 things. Number one, they think it's like best in practice, so it's good. And I'm like, well, it's broken, so it's not best in practice. And number 2, I think that most people come from the school of thought, and something that I've noticed that's different about you that I admire is they come from the school of thought of there is no answer. And I'm like, there's always an answer. It just is going to take some time and some digging and some trial and error, but there's always a freaking answer to the problem.
Yeah.
Keep going.
No, I'm just thinking, like, something we're testing at the moment, and we've seen like some good results so far.
Yeah.
Is we have this target that is global for the team. That way, like developers, customer support, sales, marketing, they all work together. When we hit the revenue target, everyone gets a bonus, everyone's happy.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Second thing we're doing is we have like the key results individually. That is basically showcasing.
For department or for the person?
For the person. Okay. So we have department and then person. And we have the mindset that stays, it's basically like grow or go.
Okay.
Which is basically, if people are not growing, they're going. Because we want to keep like a really small team.
Yeah.
And the idea, and this is like the next step of what we're going to try to build. So last year we were valued at like $150 million. And the goal is to be $1 billion company in the next 3 years. And my personal goal is that we reach that point with only 100 employees. Why? Because I want to create 100 millionaires. So I want all the employees to become millionaires in my team.
So interesting.
And the idea is to give that additional ownership through stocks.
Yeah.
And instead of, incentivizing only on bonus based on revenue targets, they have revenue targets so they get money out of it, but they also get rewarded if the company strives to the highest valuation we want to take it to. So it's either $1 billion or IPO or this type of things. And what I'm seeing right now with this mindset of grow and go is that everyone in the company is aware that they have to do the extra mile to reach those goals.
Totally.
Because everyone wants to become a millionaire.
Totally.
Like it's obviously not what drives them, but it's a good enough incentive for everyone to know that down the line there is a big reward.
Well, I think what people get wrong about what you're saying is they're like, I want people to be bought in. I'm like, then you have to pay them to be bought in.
Yeah.
They're like, I want them to be paid the same, intern. Like an example being, I have like an intern who's working for me, who's doing all my marketing. And then,
Let's name him.
No,
you want to keep him secret.
Keep him secret for the world. And he's been doing a lot of work, a lot of really good work, but then we hit the tour and I could tell after the first couple of days, I'm like, this is a lot more work than what's quote unquote normal. Now you could say like, okay, is it fair? Like, is it worth the money still? But I'm like, but that's probably not his perspective. His perspective is he gets X amount normally and now he's doing this X amount of work. And like he worked through it, period, after the first week. But then I pinged him this week and I said, hey, I want to give you an extra, I said 9 things. The 8 things were all meet, data, blah, blah, send list, do that. And then number 9 was, when you invoice us this month, I want you to invoice us for, it was a chunk of cash, this amount more. And I was like, it's not lost on me what you're doing. And his responses are always lightning fast, but I could tell just qualitatively something changed. I'm like, you took care of me, like without complaint. I'm going to take care of you, man. So it's like, to your point with I think what people can get wrong, and I think it's from a selfish mindset. Their mindset is like, oh, well, I'm going to get this funding either way, and I want it to be, or this evaluation either way, and I want it to be all on me. But I think what you realize that most people don't is you realize that how you get there and how quickly you get there is dependent upon the buy-in from your team. And you're paying that out. So most people are saying, I believe you in your money where your mouth is.
Yeah.
That you want to reward me for this. And so now all of a sudden my buy-in's higher because I own the thing. It's not just, anywho, that's really cool. That's really cool.
And something,
I now work, and that's how Becc started working for Lempire.
and something, I also want to touch based on is like the marketing aspect. Because for sales, the definition of KPI, in the end, the funnel is pretty well known. You book meetings, you close deals, and then you get revenue. You have the expansion, etc. It's pretty easy to track. I'm not saying that it's the easiest,
bulletproof, right?
And bulletproof, but it's pretty straightforward. For marketing, attribution models are extremely complex today, especially when we look at how buyers are actually doing are purchasing. They might see a post of you on LinkedIn. Later they might see your website or a video on YouTube. They might go to your website. And then if you look at the attribution model of it, it would be direct, but actually they have seen you on social, YouTube, and in 10 other places before. So what I love, and it's a sentence from Gary Vee, who says, what's the ROI of your mom? What's the ROI of your mom? And it's the same. Obviously, your mom raised you, she gave you good food so you can grow up, etc. And you can't really measure it, anything. And for me, what I like to do with my marketing team is, instead of having this incentive on MQL and things like that, I always really tell them to create things that will benefit our end users. And this can be measured through the NPS, the engagement you see in the community, the registration at events, conversion rates, all these things we track, but we don't always measure the impact of one project on all these metrics, because it would be impossible. We'd rather do several things at the same time and don't waste too much time or resources on creating a huge data warehouse with too many things. And we just feel and believe that as long as we're providing value, as long as we're teaching something to someone, as long as we're helping them solve a problem, it will benefit them. And if it benefits them, eventually it will benefit us as a business.
It's interesting. So and I know it's hard to track. But I will say this, and probably this is going to be controversial, and probably sales leaders across the globe will be like, hell yes. Marketing's battle cry is oh, well, it's really tough to attribute. And it's well, that doesn't shake your responsibility, though. Because the other thing I see marketers cry about is they're we don't have a seat at the table. And I'm it's because the table is a revenue table. It's a table of accountability. So if you don't want attribution credit, if you don't want to be held to a marker, or a standard or a number that you can get hired or fired based on, the less that you want that, you're slowly pushing yourself away from my perspective, people's respect, that people revere your work, because, again, you can't track, you can't improve what you don't measure. So if I can't measure your contribution, I think it's a soft pedal way to get out of accountability to some degree, which is fine to me. There's an avenue for that. I don't like to work with people like that. I'm measure me, put my head out on the highway, at 80 miles per hour. And if it gets knocked off, then I'll learn the next time, kind of thing. But I think for all the marketers out there who are saying it's really hard to attribute, I'm when you're making that argument, you're making the argument to essentially not be involved with the heavy hitters, from a revenue perspective in the business. So you can't cry whenever you're not welcome to the table.
But don't you feel that it pushes marketing department to only focus on things they can measure, meaning Facebook ads and Google ads?
Totally.
And put all their effort and energy on this, because in that case, it's easy to measure. At least like you have pseudo tracking that is often fake, but pseudo tracking that you're following.
You know, I don't have I'm not going to say I don't have a answer. I'm not positive that it's 100% the best answer. I broke it down into basically a model that mirrors So I have MQL, MDQL, meaning marketing decline qualified lead, MAL, MDL, and MQO, MDQO. And basically what they're hinged on, you know, in Equip is basically when they're given data to market to, like, does this person have a valid email address? Does this person have it, you know, that I can market to?
Yeah.
And then they become basically an MD or an MQO when a marketer can market to them and they take some type of action. So I think that as all things, most people like razz me for being too detailed or too granular and blah, 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 because they're like, this is really complex. I'm like, what's more complex is not hitting your goals and not knowing why, essentially. Yeah. So I broke it down into a format, and then it's the same thing on the prospecting end. PDQL, PQL, PAL, PDL, PDQO, PQO, and the same thing on the sales end. SQL, SEQL, SAL, SDL, SQO, SEQO. And basically you can diagnose very easily what's going wrong, like who's in the chopping block, but how can we get better? And so I think what you need to break it down to is, was the data that's provided to marketing, like, is it marketable? Are these people marketable? And if not, then how can we acquire that information? And then you can track out of these 10,000 people, let's say, when they were sending ads or they were trying to get someone to download an ebook, or they, like, to your point, I think what you're trying to cause is that they interact with marketing material so they get to know you. And that material should not be about your product. It should be about something to learn to get better. Yeah. So I think that that's a great ad hoc, counterintuitive KPI, is like, out of these people that marketing was delivered, that they're given to market to, what percentage were they able to get to take an action of downloading an ebook or something, so that at least you know that they've digested one of your videos, two of your videos, so you've taught them something. So it's more likely to say, this is probably going to cause, you know, some type of inbound demo request. So, you know, I think that the answer is multifaceted. I have a 17-page document called Curing the Funnel. That's as best as I can whip it up. But I think that there is an answer, as always. There's always an answer. It's just has to be multifaceted. And like, how do I put the best shot? You can't just wash it out with baby with bathwater and say, we can't attribute everything, or you walk away from the table. But I think that we have to get better as an industry about getting monomaniacal about understanding what those KPIs are and how can we track them accordingly, so we can drive people to have buy-in to the company's success, so people have buy-in to those marketers back, kind of thing. It's a long rant. You got me razzed up. So I think that we have to wrap. So unfortunately, this is my favorite session in a very long time. Thanks everyone for tuning in for Per Diem episode 5, what KPIs are and why we love them so much. Doodles.